Thanks for checking out this horror debate series video. So, as you can tell from the title, we're covering something that not a lot of people think about all that often, or at least when they're watching a movie, they don't pay a ton of attention to. It's like something you know is going on and you know is there, but you're so focused on the pictures on the screen that it just blends in and you're not super cognizant of it. And that is horror movie soundtracks. What is the best horror movie soundtrack? Now, this is a tricky one. This is tough because people are going to experience soundtracks in different ways. You know, one soundtrack that'll really affect someone in a very strong way and they would say this is the best isn't going to be the same for another person. But then again, this is what these horror debate series videos are basically all about. They're all opinion based. It's not fact. So just throwing it out there. I do have to say, disclaimer, when I'm doing this video, since I'm recording well ahead of time because we planned a lot of these out ahead of time, I don't know what Uncle Pete's pick is, but he knows what my pick is. So, yeah, I just have no idea what he's picking. He could pick something totally amazing. I'm like, crap, I should have done that one. But we'll see how this goes. I think I got some really strong stuff. So, real quick. If you don't know how it works, you watch my video all the way through, then you go to your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete's channel, which is linked in my description. You watch his video of the same name, get his pick, hear his justifications. Then you can, if you want to, come back here, go to my community tab, and vote on who you think had the best arguments. Or there's also a selection for making it a tie. But anyway, that's just a for fun type thing. So let's get into it. My pick for the best horror movie soundtrack has got to be Suspiria. Wonderful film, obviously. Dario Argento. I wore this intentionally. This is my Giallo shirt with all these Giallo directors on it. And yes, this is all I have. I still just have it on DVD. I still watch DVDs. I'm sorry. I literally do. I need to upgrade this at some point, though, because the colors, man. I have a 4K TV now. The colors. Anyway, Suspiria, highly influential, not just because of the storyline and because of the aesthetics, but highly influential because of the actual soundtrack, which obviously is done by Goblin. Goblin has collaborated with Dario Argento many times. I think their first collaboration with Argento was with Deep Red, which, from what I understand, I'm going to put this down. From what I understand, they weren't initially on board to do the soundtrack. Someone else was doing it, and then Argento didn't fully like the soundtrack. So Goblin was brought in to kind of add a few extra songs and kind of tweak what was already there. So from what I've read, I read an article interviewing Claudio Simonetti from Goblin. He was basically saying that he didn't think that was their best work. But he did believe that Suspiria is by far their best film soundtrack work. And I would agree with that. I think they did a phenomenal job. The soundtrack speaks for itself. When I was getting ready for this, I was listening to the entire soundtrack a few times on Spotify, so you can easily find it. Just look for Goblin and you can find the Suspiria soundtrack. And honestly, it's a soundtrack that's not just good during a movie, it's a lot of fun just to listen to. And that goes to my first point about it, which is the music is really funky and upbeat. It gives you this feeling of just like feeling happy, feeling good, feeling engaged, energetic to some degree. Now you get this in Deep Red, and it's this weird style that Goblin started doing that not a lot of people saw coming, because a lot of times it kind of feels like it mismatches what's going on in the film. But then at the same time, it feels like it really fits in there and it works. It's such an odd thing. And they do small things too, which I'll end up talking about the small things that really have a lot of impact on the film. I'm not going to go through in this and be like, during this particular scene, this was playing and stuff like that. That would be way too much. So I have my bullet points. On to number 2. The incorporation of whispering in the track called Suspiria adds a creepy vibe. There's also a track called Sigh that ends up using whispering as well as actual sighing a bunch. So the incorporation of actual human voice and in a weird, creepy, kind of ethereal at times manner really helps the ambiance, the atmosphere of the film itself. And it just kind of like makes you feel a little uneasy. Like things are kind of off with the film. And those touches are brilliant, in my opinion. They add so much to the film, amazingly thought out. My next point. The use of synthesizers gives an ethereal feel that adds to the phantasmic aspect of the story. Obviously, it's got this kind of like almost dark magic aspect of the film because of the witches aspect. I said aspect twice, but yeah, you know what I mean. But the fact that synthesizers are used, it makes it more ethereal, along with the sighing and the kind of like guttural human noises. That especially the synthesizers, because they're kind of like they're otherworldly, and especially at this point, synthesizers weren't being used a whole lot in soundtracks, so it kind of really stood out as being something not of this world. Which, you know, if you consider what's going on with the witches in the film, it feels very much not of this world, and that use of the synthesizers really helps, you know, kind of have more of a positive impact on feeling that through the film. The quick, choppy beat and guttural voices in the song Witch give a tense and distressing feeling to the film. This is one of the great things about what Goblin does, at least in particular with this soundtrack, is they have this way of using these kind of like off sounds that make you feel different ways. And in this instance, like I'm talking about, like the choppiness and the guttural voice noises in it, they just make you feel off. They make you feel tense. They put you on edge a little bit. And this really, if you think about this soundtrack and you really pay attention when you're watching the film, it speaks to how important soundtracks really can be in a film. Even though the songs are cohesive with one another, they also feel extremely different. That's one of the other things. They feel like they're part of a large work. Excuse me. My apologies. But when you're listening to them separately, they also feel like they're all their own thing. So for that reason, so like I was saying before, like they're totally cool to just be like driving around in your car, just listening to this music, because it's just like legit enjoyable music. Instrumental, obviously, but enjoyable. Excuse me. Most tracks are easily able to be enjoyed as just instrumentals that you can listen to whenever. Sorry, literally just saw that. Didn't know that was my next bullet point. Forgot about that bullet point, actually. Real quick, I do need to pause for horror hydration. Throat gets dry, you know? Anyway, next point. The track Black Forest is a really interesting, fun journey. Now, this is the longest song on the soundtrack, and it is a wild ride. It hits all over the place. It sounds literally like a journey that you're going through with Goblin. And to match it up with what's going on in Suspiria helps you even more. It feels like you're on a journey with the film as well. But overall, I would say Black Forest is my favorite song on that soundtrack. I know a lot of people would probably point and be like, oh man, I mean, the title track, Suspiria, has got to be. But I like Black Forest the most. Because like I said, it just feels like such an interesting journey. The narration track, this is what it's called, narration track, features xylophone that sounds like it's on the line between dream and nightmare. And this gives it almost a Grimm's fairy tale type feel for me, which I think is very appropriate given what the story is with Suspiria. That's a very much kind of Grimm's fairy tale type story. Obviously, it's not based on that, but it kind of feels like it could be. The fact that they make it like smack dab in the middle of dream and nightmare is a very interesting thing. And I feel like that's really hard to achieve, because if you go too far one way or another, it's either too light and too happy, or it's too dark and too foreboding. So to hit it right in the middle, it makes you feel good and bad at the same time, which is just really, really, really interesting. And I love that aspect of it. Like I said, like they made a lot of very interesting, impactful choices with the score. The soundtrack. In numerous spots, they use discordant sounds that give a sense of unease and something being awry. This is another great thing that soundtracks can do, which is give you these noises that feel like they don't go with each other, that feel like they are off, therefore something in the film is off. And they do a bunch of that throughout the film in a bunch of different ways, using a lot of different instruments. And it's very interesting. Love it. 2 more points here. Goblin is said to have inspired an entire synthwave movement, as synthesizers were barely ever used in film soundtracks. Suspiria was also considered their best film that they worked on, per Claudio Simonetti. So I'm saying this to basically say that the impact of the soundtrack plays into my choice. They started a lot of people being interested in using synthesizers more for soundtracks. They went heavy on using what's called a Moog. If you don't know what it is, just look it up. I've known about Moogs just because I happened to, I think it was in my senior year of college, took a electronic music course. So I worked with a Moog actually to make some music. But yeah, it's just really interesting that they kind of kickstarted synthesizers being used a lot more in soundtracks. Also, the fact that the inspiration that they gave to other composers obviously has a lot of impact on things. And that leads me to my last point, which a lot of people talk about John Carpenter and his scores. I mean, he is an amazing musical composer. He makes awesome soundtracks for films. Obviously, a lot of people will cite Halloween and say that Halloween is just so good when it comes to the music. And I agree, like it really, really is. And I considered choosing Halloween at first, but then I realized that there was inspiration there. Where did John Carpenter get his style? Where did he get his inspiration? He got it from Goblin. So I would argue that the soundtrack for Suspiria is even better, because without their work, without Goblin's work, you don't have the work of John Carpenter necessarily. And that leads me to my last point. It inspired John Carpenter, especially his soundtrack for Halloween, which he has said before. Simonetti claims that when he met John Carpenter, this is what Simonetti claims, that John Carpenter said to him, "I know you," quote, "I know you very well. I stole all your music." Just saying. That says everything, if that's a true quote, because, people's memories aren't 100%. But, yeah. So those are all my points. Sorry, this is a little bit on the longer end for these, but I think I did a good job arguing why Suspiria's soundtrack is really good. And if you don't think that I'm right about this, just go listen to it. I'm sure it's on YouTube as well as Spotify. I know it's on Spotify because that's where I listen to it. But definitely listen to it. It is a fun time. I literally was like working and just listening while I worked. And yeah, it kept me feeling good. I'll say that much. Goblin's a very talented band. And I think they're still touring right now. So if you can get tickets, and I think they do things where they actually play two portions of Argento films and some other films I think they've worked on as well, but very cool idea. So keep an eye out. But again, do me and Uncle Pete a favor, subscribe to both our channels, hit the notification bell button for both our channels, all that awesome jazz. Thank you everyone for participating in this series. It's been a lot of fun for us. I know it's been a lot of fun for the people who've been commenting, and we love those comments, so keep those comments coming. I'm not the best at getting back to them immediately, but within a few weeks, I will for sure. Sometimes it's within a week, sometimes it's within 3 weeks. Just depends on how things are going. But thank you for checking these out. Until next time, keep it brutal.